She rescued a man on the street, and the next day, she lost her job. But when she learned that this stranger was the CEO of a major corporation himself, her life changed forever. Desperation, struggle for a new job, an unexpected chance, and an offer that couldn't be missed. Fate has brought them together, but what will happen next? Stay tuned if you want to find out how this story ends, and don't forget to subscribe. Jane Carter ran through the congested streets of Chicago, her heels clicking on the pavement as she got off the subway. Her heart was racing. She had already arrived at work late. As she made her way through the pedestrians, Jane muttered to herself, "Mr. Morgan is going to kill me." She stopped in front of the cafe on the corner, wondering if she should spend her precious time grabbing a coffee. Her rumbling stomach reminded her she hadn't had breakfast. "All right," Jane said, hurrying inside. "Linda, good morning. As always, please hurry up. I'm running late." Jane let out a breath as the old barista, Linda, grinned while approaching. Jane's uneasiness grew as she glanced at her watch. She picked up the coffee. She hurried out the door, calling back, "Thanks, Linda." As she briskly walked down the sidewalk, the hot coffee warmed her palms while she practiced her excuse for Mr. Morgan. "I apologize for being late, Mr. Morgan, but no, maybe I should just say, I'm sorry, Mr. Morgan." A man in his mid-30s, wearing a business suit, stumbled and leaned against the building, his face turning pale, interrupting her. Jane paused, worry creasing her forehead. "Sir, are you all right?" she called out hesitantly. The man gave her a confused look. "I'm not sure," he murmured. "There's something wrong." He began to slump as his eyes rolled back. "Help!" Jane yelled, urging someone to call an ambulance. The crowd of onlookers froze, but none offered assistance. Jane dialed 911, her hands shaking. "What is your emergency?" 911, asked the operator. "A man is unconscious on the street. Please send an ambulance." Jane responded quickly. "Stay with him. What's the address?" "We're in front of Mike's Cafe at the intersection of Michigan Avenue and 8th Street. There's an ambulance coming. Does he have a pulse?" Jane leaned in. "Yes, but it's irregular. Wait, I think so. It's weak. Good. Keep checking for a pulse. Hold on until help arrives." Jane held the man's hand. "Hold on, please," she whispered. "Help is coming." Time seemed to drag. She stared at his pale face, praying he would keep breathing. The crowd had grown, but nobody knew him. The ambulance finally arrived, sirens blaring. Paramedics assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. "What happened here?" one asked, kneeling beside the man. "I found him collapsed," Jane explained. "He has a weak pulse." "You made the right call," the paramedic nodded. "Get the defibrillator, Jim. Looks like a heart attack." The man was loaded onto a stretcher and brought into the ambulance. "Are you family?" a paramedic asked Jane. "No, just a bystander." "Can I ride along? Maybe you'll need more information." After exchanging glances, the paramedics nodded. "Okay, hop in." At the hospital, the man was rushed to critical care. Jane filled out a form, noting she wasn't related. A nurse smiled and said, "You're incredibly kind. Most people wouldn't have gone this far." Jane shrugged, a bit embarrassed. "I couldn't just leave him." Exhausted, Jane collapsed into a plastic chair in the hallway. Only then did she realize she was 3 hours late for work. Panic set in. Should she go and risk her job, or stay and make sure the man was okay? The ICU doctor emerged. "Miss Carter?" "Yes, that's me," Jane replied, leaping to her feet. "He's stable," the doctor grinned. "He suffered a heart attack, but he'll recover because of your quick action." Thank God," Jane whispered, her legs nearly buckling. "He's out of the critical stage, but we'll continue monitoring him." "I appreciate your help, Miss Carter. The world needs more people like you." Jane smiled faintly. "All I did was what anyone would do." "Unfortunately, not everyone would," the doctor shook his head. "You should be proud." Jane didn't care about the expense when she flagged a cab after leaving the hospital. She urged the driver to hurry to the office, rehearsing her explanation for Mr. Morgan the whole way. He was notoriously short-tempered and intolerant of tardiness. Jane took a deep breath before entering the office. The usual bustle seemed amplified, and coworkers glanced at her as she walked in. "Where have you been, Jane?" Mr. Morgan is furious. Lucy, his secretary, whispered. Let me explain. Jane sighed, heading for his office. Good luck, Lucy murmured softly. At a brusque command, Jane knocked and entered. You're 3 hours late, Miss Carter. Mr. Morgan exploded. I can explain. Jane began nervously. You've put a major deal at risk. Don't make excuses. The entire team is disappointed in you. You're fired. Pack your belongings. Jane's heart sank. Listen, please. A man's life was saved by me. Really? Who? Mr. Morgan chuckled. Jane took a deep breath and described the hospital, the ambulance, and the man. Do you think I'll believe this absurd tale? He finally said. Jane requested that I show you the hospital documents, but even if it's true, it doesn't justify your tardiness. You ought to have called. You're not a good fit for this company. You're fired. Jane's eyes flooded with tears. Give me another chance, please. I'll work harder than ever before. Mr. Morgan looked away. Farewell, Miss Carter. The ground seemed shaky beneath Jane as she walked out. Oh, Lucy, she whispered. He fired me when he saw my face smeared with tears, didn't he? Unable to speak, Jane nodded. Lucy whispered, that old jerk. Don't worry. You'll find a better job. Do you want me to talk to him? Thank you, but no. Jane shook her head. You know how stubborn he is. I appreciate your kindness. The two hugged. After gathering her belongings, Jane left the office. A light rain fell, as if the city mourned her failure. What comes next? She murmured to herself as she walked along the sidewalk. She didn't want to return to her small apartment with its empty fridge and mounting debts. She decided to walk back to the hospital. At the reception desk, she took a deep breath. Hello. This morning, I brought in a patient. Can I check on his condition? The middle-aged nurse, with her gentle demeanor, smiled warmly. Sure, sweetheart. What's his name? Carter. Jane Carter. The nurse typed. I'm afraid the news isn't good. He's still unconscious, and despite the best efforts of the medical team, his condition remains critical. Jane's heart sank. Oh no. Is there any hope? Will he recover? The nurse smiled softly. Hope never dies. We have the best doctors here, and they're doing everything possible. Has his family been contacted? No contact yet, no ID. The police are working on it, the nurse said. Oh God, Jane muttered. So he's lying there all alone? Indeed, the nurse replied sympathetically. Jane hesitated, then looked up resolutely. Can I sit with him? You shouldn't be alone, though I understand that's not typical. The nurse hesitated, then grinned. All right, but only for a short time. If the doctors need the room, you'll have to leave. Thank you, Jane said, smiling. In room 305, she stood near the entrance and watched the man surrounded by monitors. He had a strained, pale face. Silently, she took his hand and moved to his bedside. Uncertain if he could hear her, she whispered softly, Hello. I called the ambulance. I couldn't leave you on the street when you collapsed. Jane paused, waiting for any reaction on his face, but there was none. It was a crazy day, she added. I lost my job because I was late. Apparently, paperwork is more important than saving lives. Do you think that's possible? Jane sighed. I don't regret it. The important thing is that you're alive. She squeezed his hand lightly. I believe you'll recover. Someone loves you, and helping you will make me feel good. As she listened to the hospital's ambient noises, she fell silent. I've always wanted to do something meaningful, she said. Being a secretary felt pointless. But today, I felt like I accomplished something significant. Jane smiled. Maybe it's a sign that I should change my life. Helping people has always been my goal. Maybe I should consider volunteering or social work. My mom used to say that obstacles are chances for growth. Losing my job could be the start of something new. She turned to face the man again. In a way, we've both helped each other. Maybe this encounter will improve my life. Jane talked about her life, aspirations, and the value of helping others. She hoped her presence and voice made a difference, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. According to my grandmother, compassion is a language that the blind can see and the deaf can hear. I understand now, she said. Then the nurse announced that visiting hours were over. Jane got her feet. Thank you for letting me stay. She squeezed the man's hand before turning to face him. I'll be back tomorrow. Hang in there. I believe in you. Jane looked back as she left. "See you tomorrow," she said softly. She walked down the hallway with a mix of melancholy, worry, and renewed resolve. "What's his status?" the nurse asked. "No change, but he'll get better," Jane replied. "You underestimate the power of your faith," the nurse grinned. "I hope you'll return tomorrow. Even if they can't respond, patients need someone to talk to." "I will," Jane nodded. "Thank you for everything." Despite losing her job, she felt strangely at ease as she left the hospital. The knowledge that she had made the right decision gave her the fortitude to face the day. With a heavy heart, Jane went to her former office the next morning to collect her belongings. "How are you?" Lucy greeted her. "I've improved," Jane said, managing a feeble smile. "I've come just to pick up my things." Lucy responded empathetically. "I'm so sorry." Mr. Morgan was too harsh. "Maybe next time." Jane shook her head. "Could you look after my plant?" "All right." As she packed her things, Jane took one last look around her office. It was over, and she had so many memories. Determined to begin her job search, she left the office and went to the nearest Wi-Fi cafe. She sent resumes hour after hour, but the replies were disheartening. "Your experience doesn't meet our needs. No openings at this time. We've decided to move forward with other candidates." By nightfall, Jane was worn out. The rent was due in 3 weeks, she realized after checking the calendar. "Okay," she said firmly. "It's time to act. You can succeed." She scoured job sites, writing cover letters, and putting her best effort into each one. "No, it's too formal," she muttered. "I am confident in my expertise and abilities, sir or madam. Let me try again." Jane forced herself to wake up at 6 every morning, even though she was exhausted. "Get up and shine, sleepyhead," she told her reflection. "A fresh day brings new possibilities." She ate a hurried breakfast and scrolled through job listings on her phone. "This one looks interesting, working as an administrative assistant at a marketing agency." "I can do it," she said, pressing the button. "Good morning. I'm calling about the administrative assistant position." "Yes," came the reply. "Can you attend an interview today at 2? "Yes," Jane responded, a glimmer of hope in her voice. "Thank you." Jane waited anxiously at the marketing company's office. Finally, she was called in. "I'm Carol Stevens, HR Director," the woman said. "Hello, Miss Carter. Please take a seat." Jane took a deep breath and enthusiastically discussed her background and skills. "Well done, Miss Carter," Carol nodded. "However, we're looking for someone with marketing experience." Jane felt her hope slipping away. "I'll learn quickly. I'll prove my value if you give me a chance. I'll put in extra hours and study everything about marketing in my spare time," she added. Carol shook her head. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. We don't have time for training, but you seem like a driven individual. Your resume will remain on file." Jane fought back tears as she left the office and leaned against the wall. "Don't give up," she murmured. "This was just the first interview. There'll be others." That day, there were 2 more interviews, but the results were the same: courteous rejections paired with promises they'd call if anything changed. Despite these setbacks, Jane kept her promise to visit the hospital. The tension of the day melted away as she entered room 305. "Hello," she whispered softly, sitting near the bed. "Today, I had 3 interviews. I'm not giving up, but I haven't had any luck yet." Taking the man's hand, she drew strength from the simple touch. A hiring manager said I appeared motivated. "That's something, right? Maybe next time." As she stared at his expressionless face, she fell quiet. "Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself, but then I remember, you might hear me. I think you'll recover." She talked about the struggles and small victories of her job search. Surprisingly, conversing with the unconscious man was calming. "Your visits remind me why I started, to help someone. They give me the willpower to keep going." On her way out, she ran into a familiar nurse. "Hello, Jane," the nurse smiled. "How are you today?" Jane sighed. "It's been tough. 3 interviews, 3 rejections, but I'm trying to stay positive." The nurse shook her head sympathetically. "Despite everything, Jane, I see you here every day. You're a wonderful person." "Thank you." Jane grinned, somewhat relieved. "I'll try my hardest." Later that evening, Jane sat at her kitchen table, counting the money she still had. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see. If I cut back, I could make it another 15 days." But she dismissed the negative thoughts with a shake of her head. There has to be a way. There must be. Ignoring the late hour, she opened her laptop and resumed her job search, crafting new resumes and cover letters. Assistant in a publishing house. Maybe this one fits, she reasoned. Sounds interesting. Now I'll send my resume. When Jane finally turned off her laptop and went to bed, it was well past midnight. As she slept in the dark, she reflected on the day, the hospitalized man, and the unknown future. Uncertain whether she was speaking to the universe, God, or fate, she murmured, "Please," into the darkness. "I hope tomorrow is better. Let anything proceed well." Days passed, and nothing changed despite Jane's efforts. One evening, while sitting at the kitchen table tallying the money she still had saved, she realized she could no longer delay the inevitable. "So, this is it," she whispered, her unshed tears making her voice tremble. "I can't stay here." She grabbed the phone and called her landlord. "Hello, Mr. Green? It's Jane Carter. What can I do for you, Miss Carter?" Jane took a deep breath. "I won't be able to pay the rent for next month, Mr. Green. I need to move out." There was a pause. "Are you sure, Miss Carter? Perhaps we could come to an agreement." Jane shook her head. "No, Mr. Green. I haven't found a new job since losing mine. There's nothing I can do. I have to move back in with my parents." "I'm truly sorry to hear that," Mr. Green said. "You've been an excellent tenant." "Thank you," Jane replied quietly. "Could you prepare the paperwork? I'll be gone in a week." After the call, Jane sat motionless for a long time, staring at nothing. She began to realize just how bad things had gotten. Her dream of living in Chicago was over. The next day, as usual, Jane went to the hospital. A knot formed in her throat as she walked into room 305. She sat by the bed and said, "Hello. I came to say goodbye today, but here I am again." As she had done every day for the past few weeks, she took the man's hand. "It didn't work out, even though I really hoped to find a job and stay in Chicago. I don't even have enough money to last a few more months while looking for work. I have to leave and go back to my hometown." Jane hesitated, trying to hold back her emotions. "You know I'll miss you. You know it's strange. Even though we didn't know each other well, these visits have become very important in my life. You helped me keep going through tough times." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "I think you'll recover. You'll be okay. Maybe one day you'll wake up and tell the nurses about the strange woman who visited you every day. I hope you smile when you think of me." With tears streaming down her face, she stood up. "Thank you for everything, and goodbye." After taking one last look at his still face, Jane carefully closed the door and walked out of the room. His hand moved slightly in response to her words, but she didn't notice. During her final week in Chicago, Jane packed her belongings. Each item she packed brought back a memory. "Do you remember when you bought this mug?" she said to herself, carefully wrapping it in newspaper. "That was your first day of work. You were so excited." She came across an old photo of herself at a work party with her co-workers. "I wonder how they're doing," she mused. "I hope Lucy is okay." To avoid thinking about what she was leaving behind, Jane methodically packed her life into cardboard boxes. Memorabilia, clothing, and books all found their places in the boxes. The night before she left, Jane watched the city lights from the windowsill. "Goodbye," she murmured, "Dream City. I appreciate all the lessons, the highs and lows. Maybe I'll come back someday. Until then, it's time to start a new chapter." With that, she closed the window and finished her final preparations. The morning of her departure was overcast, as if the city itself was reluctant to see her go. Jane sighed and began loading the boxes into the rental car after taking one last look at the empty apartment. "Well," she whispered, shutting the trunk, "this is it. Goodbye, big city." Suddenly, she heard hurried footsteps approaching. Turning, she saw a man running toward her, holding a bunch of roses. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew who he was. The hospital patient. He stopped in front of Jane to catch his breath and shouted, "I'm glad I was able to catch you in time." Disbelieving her eyes, Jane said, "You're awake. But how did you find me?" As he handed her the bouquet, the man grinned. "I heard every word you said while I was in a coma, and the first thing I thought when I woke up was to find you." Tears filled Jane's eyes, as she took the flowers. "I don't know what to say." He handed her an envelope and said earnestly, "Say you won't leave." Inside were her employment documents and a lease for a new apartment. "Stay in Chicago, please." Jane looked at the envelope, then back at him in surprise. "But why? I'm just a stranger to you." "No," he replied softly. "I know you're compassionate and kind. You didn't abandon a stranger in need. Even in the face of despair, you persevere, and I want someone like that by my side." Jane began to cry uncontrollably and hugged him tightly. "I'm so glad you're okay," she sobbed. He returned the embrace, and they stood there for a moment, oblivious to the curious glances of onlookers. When Jane had calmed down slightly, he suggested they check out her new location. Still dazed by the events unfolding, she nodded. He led her to an opulent black car. "By the way, I hadn't had the chance to properly introduce myself." He introduced himself as Alex Hastings. "Hastings?" Jane said, startled. "Like Hastings Industries?" Alex nodded. "That's right. I'm the CEO." Jane was taken aback. Hastings Industries was one of the largest tech firms in the country. It turned out her new apartment was a luxurious suite with a stunning view of Central Park. Alex showed her around. The spacious living area, the modern kitchen, and a bedroom the size of her previous apartment. "This is excessive," Jane muttered. "This won't do for me," Alex responded lightly. "Besides, you deserve it as a thank you for saving my life." Sitting in the living room, Alex began to recount his story. "I'm an orphan," he explained. "I have no family to rely on, just my employees. I often go on long work trips. When I went missing, they were surprised but assumed I was involved in some secret project. They tried to manage without me while they waited for my return." Jane listened intently, holding her breath. "When I woke up, I was shocked by how much time had passed," Alex continued. "But my first thought was finding you. You were the constant in the chaos. Your stories and your voice helped me recover," Jane said softly. "I'm glad I could help." "You did far more than that," Alex replied solemnly. "Now, I'd like to offer you a job. I need a personal assistant I can fully trust, someone like you." Jane was speechless. "I've never worked for a company that size," she stammered. "You'll see," Alex smiled. "Money can't buy qualities like compassion and honesty." Jane took a deep breath and, with Alex's gentle encouragement, she agreed. The weeks that followed flew by as Jane immersed herself in her new role, helping Alex regain control of his business. She quickly adapted, grasping the intricacies of corporate life on the go. Beyond being a successful businessman, Alex proved to be an excellent mentor, taking the time to answer her questions and patiently explaining various aspects of the work. One day, after Jane delivered an impressive presentation to a group of investors, Alex commented, "You're doing better than I expected." The compliment made Jane blush. "I have a good teacher," she replied. For a moment, their eyes met and held. Over time, their relationship grew into something more than just professional. As Alex gazed out the office window one evening, Jane found herself admiring his profile. During their conversations, Alex began touching her arm more frequently. One night, after working late on a major project, they ordered dinner for the office. Exhausted but content, they relaxed on the couch to eat and talk. Alex suddenly set down his plate. "You know, Jane," he said, "I never really believed in destiny. But now I think our meeting was meant to be." Jane's heart raced. "What are you saying?" she asked softly. Alex took her hand. "You saved my life on the street, but you've changed my life in so many other ways. You've shown me that kindness and selflessness still exist in the world. You've become an essential part of my life." Jane stared into his eyes, her breath caught in her throat. Before she could speak, Alex interrupted by pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. Warmth flooded through her as she responded to the hesitant, questioning touch. When they finally parted, Alex smiled. "Jane Carter, you've stolen my heart. I want to be with you in life as much as at work. It's your voice, your kindness, your strength that have captured me." Jane's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Alex, I love you too," she replied. "You've restored my belief in miracles." Knowing their lives would never be the same, they shared another kiss. Though challenges lay ahead, they were confident they could face them together.